The pastor explained to his congregation that the church was in great need of some extra money, and he asked her to consider giving generously. He offered that whoever gave the most in the plate would be able to pick 3 hymns. After the plate had gone round, the pastor noticed that somebody had most graciously offered a $100 bill. He was so excited that he immediately asked who it was and said he would like to personally thank them. A very quiet elderly lady at the back shyly raised her hand, and he asked her to come out to the front. He thanked her for her wonderful gift and asked her to choose 3 hymns. Her eyes twinkled with glee as she looked out into the congregation, and she pointed at the 3 most handsome men in the room and said, "I'll have him and him and him." All joking aside, it's actually really difficult to stand up at the front and talk about generosity and giving. It's just not very British, is it? I said earlier in the earlier service, but big thanks to Margaret, because it's not easy talking about money, and certainly not thinking about the end of our lives. And obviously Rob talked about it last week as well, and how much it costs for the church to be run. It's tricky. As Brits, we're really good at forming a queue and taking our turn, but maybe not so good about talking about money. And if we get the slightest inclination that somebody might be about to do that, how do we behave? So how many strategies have we developed to avoid that person shaking that charity box, either in the street or the supermarket? I asked in my office at work about this, and these were the 4 best responses. Number 1, do not, whatever you do, make eye contact. And if you do not smile. Number 2 was pretend to be on your phone. Number 3 was, if you do make eye contact, shrug apologetically and mouth. You don't even say this out loud, you just mouth, "No change, no change." And number 4, and Simon and I have been guilty of this, is give your child the coin of the lowest denomination you have and let them do it and run on by. I was saying earlier that actually the best way to get my money in the supermarket is to offer to pack my bags, because I'll actually pay you more not to do it than to do it, but that's more about my OCD and bag packing. And who puts cans on top of bread? Who does that? Scouts, generally. So, it's like... So, today marks the beginning of the Diocesan Generosity Week, but it is so much more than us shaking a plate under your nose or waving a parish giving form at you. It's actually about us exploring together what it is to be a Christian and what the Bible teaches about having and developing a spirit of generosity, both as individuals and as a church. We should focus on the Christian desire to give rather than the church's need to receive. Please don't misunderstand me. The church does need money, and we know how much it costs to run the church every week. But our motive behind our giving should be to bless others, not because we feel guilty or somebody's browbeaten us into it. Both of our readings today actually give clear indications about what our relationship with our material wealth should be. In Luke, we can see that the Pharisees considered wealth to be a measure of someone's righteousness because they had been blessed by God. Interestingly, we live in a materialistic and consumerist society which fuels the notion of self-worth is founded in material wealth and happiness is in our possessions. Jesus shows us that the rich man did not go to hell because of his wealth, but because of what he failed to do with it. He could have chosen to help Lazarus, but instead he ignored him, even though he went past him every day and must have seen his evident need. When I was just reading the passage this second time, there was something that popped up, which often does when you read a passage over and over. You see something afresh. How desperate must the rich man have been in heaven because he wanted to lick the water from the tip of the beggar's finger, whose sores were licked by dogs. So how desperate must that man in hell have been to think that licking that man's finger was a good option? And the other thing was when Abraham says to the rich man, how much, sorry, I'll read it. I don't want to get it wrong because it really just popped out again. He said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead. And Jesus is telling this story about Abraham, the rich man and the beggar. And this is Jesus saying he is going to rise from the dead. He knows he is. But he's saying, if you won't believe the prophets, why, you're not going to believe me either. And this is why we as Christians need to grab hold of these things and believe them while we're alive, because it's too late when you're dead. In his letter to Timothy, Paul helpfully gives us some guidelines about how we should steward our personal finances. So the first part of the passage, but godliness with contentment is great gain. That's a real sort of sweeping statement, but how do we get that? So the next bit, for we brought nothing into the world and can take nothing out of it. What he's telling us there is that one day our riches will be gone. And tying in what Margaret said and what my nan used to say, shrouds don't have pockets. The next part is, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And here we're being told that we should be content with what we have. We shouldn't be seeking the next best thing. What we have is what we need. It's not always what we want, but if we have what we need, we should be content. The next part is people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So we as Christians should monitor what we are willing to do in order to get more money. How often do we hear about people's ill-gotten gains? What are we prepared to do to have more? Is it right? Does it align with our faith? And then we're told that we should love people more than money, because here he's saying, but you, man of God, flee from all of this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. These are qualities that we as Christians should have, and we're called to love other people, and we're also called to love God. So we're told to love God more than money. We shouldn't let money be the thing that we worship. And then finally in this part, we're told that we should freely share what we have with others, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. Paul's teaching forms a really useful framework to help us to appraise our own attitudes towards our finances. And in doing that, it might help us to look outwards instead of inwards. We all know it's good to share. We teach our children from a very young age to be kind, to share their toys, their sweets, and their playtime. I remember when Harriet was quite small, she used to chatter a lot. I can't imagine where she got that from, but she did. And I was telling my friend who'd got a child of a similar age how much Harriet chatted. And when they came to visit, the only thing that Harriet could say when Felicity was trying to play with Harriet's toys was, oh dear me, oh dear me. And it was because as an only child, she wasn't really used to sharing. But that is a quality, isn't it, that we encourage in our children. So why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we share our things, our time, our money? It's not good to be selfish, self-centered, and lonely. At the heart of Christian generosity is the desire to demonstrate love and to bless others, as we ourselves have been loved and blessed by God. So it should be with an attitude of thankfulness and gratitude for all that we have, that we are called to ensure that others have all that they need. So that we are called with an attitude of thankfulness and gratitude for all that we have, to make sure that others have all that they need. In Matthew 6, chapter 2, it's clear that God expects us to give and to be generous like him. Jesus says, so, when you give to the needy, He does not say if. So as you know, next Sunday is our harvest celebration, and our donations will be going to the Trussell Trust Food Bank, which we support. The Trussell Trust now has more than 1,200 food banks across the country, and they also campaign for social change. Whilst it's amazing that they have 1,200 food banks doing good things, it's also terribly sad that as a nation we need them. They hold Matthew 25:35 as their core value. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. This passage shows us that God does not expect supernatural acts from us, but simple acts of charity. Many years ago, at Harvest, we had a nun come to speak to us, and her name was Sister Winsome. And Simon and I were new Christians, and we were just wrestling with the thoughts of giving. And I think at that point we still just put loose change or whatever we had in our pockets in the plate, and that was fine. And Sister Winsome spoke about giving, and she spoke about harvest festivals. And there are some people in the room who might remember, but you know, when I was at school, we used to have to take a little box in with tins, and we'd all take that into school, and then they would be given to the elderly and the poor in the area, and we would take them out. So she talked about bringing those things to church as a gift, and she asked, why is it there is a high proportion of out-of-date tins of peaches, and of Spam? And she suggested it was because people looked in the cupboard at what they didn't need or didn't want and got rid of it. And she said, if Jesus came to tea, would you give him Spam? Or would you make him the most amazing meal? Even if it meant that you didn't eat for the rest of the week, what would you feed Jesus? Now, I appreciate that for some people, giving Jesus Spam might be all they can afford to do, but I think it would be fair to say that most people could do better than that. And so for us, actually a yardstick that we put against everything, not just giving, not about, you know, if we're doing the shoebox appeal or we're doing harvest, but also financial giving, is mine and Simon's strapline is don't give Spam. So wherever we are, we always try to do or give the best we can. Now, sometimes it might be more beneficial to go and buy a bag full of smart price food from Asda, because that means that 20 people might get the rice or the pasta or the canned tomatoes. But sometimes one person might just need to feel really special, and you push the boat out for them. So it works for us. No more Spam. So maybe it's time for us to take stock of what we have, both as individuals and as a church. Give thanks to God for his goodness and plan to only pursue what we need. And this final slide, this is the end of the passage, but actually from the message: to do good, to be rich in helping others, to be extravagantly generous. So I pray that the Lord opens our eyes and our hearts to the needs of those around us and gives us the courage to be extravagantly generous. Amen.